It's on. So I had a little bit of a revelation from God that he wanted me to speak from Genesis chapter 4 again. So anyway, I'm hoping that's the way that it is. So the reason is because we didn't really finish chapter 4, and I really want to get into chapter 5. I'm very excited about Sunday's message. We're going to talk about somewhat the genealogy in chapter 5, especially the genealogy of Jesus, and then the sons of God leading into chapter 6. So lots of really good stuff coming up. But there's some stuff I left undone in chapter 4 that I still want to talk about. I also want to do this. Since we have some very interesting and unfortunately somewhat controversial things coming up in Genesis chapter 6 regarding the sons of God and who they are. So I want to mention that tonight because I don't want to dwell on that on a morning message. I've talked about it before, but I do want to mention it at least initially tonight before we actually look at chapter 4 further. So let me ask Sister Ginger, Brother Sam, Sister Valerie, you guys all have medical background. You studied biology. You know how things work. Brother Bruce, you were a high school teacher. You know these things. We all went through school. So let me ask you a question. Can a woman get impregnated by an animal? No. No. Animal seed cannot impregnate a woman's egg. Can a plant seed impregnate a woman? No. The Bible makes it very clear that there are differences of species and they do not cross, generally speaking. Now, there are some things that cross within species, of course. Look at the dogs. There's all kinds of different breeds that they are bred for a specific purpose. So man can have fun with that, but you can't crossbreed. You can't cross a dog with an eagle and get a flying dog or a barking eagle. It's not going to work. So the question is, and this is where it stops with me regarding the sons of God in chapter 6 being fallen angelic beings. It doesn't make any sense. And the reason I'm kind of stressing that is because if you research that, over 90% of commentaries that you will hear will stress the fact that those are fallen angels. So we're going to talk about that. It honestly just does not make any sense to me. So as soon as they start presenting that theory, I get lost because it doesn't make any sense. That theory has a couple of different names. One is the supernatural theology regarding that. In other words, the fallen angels came down and saw the women and had relationships and produced what are referred to as the Nephilim in verse 4 in chapter 6. What's that?
That's very Greek, though.
It's what?
Very Greek.
Very Greek?
Yeah, because it's far mythology.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that comes. Honestly, I think it gets rooted in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say, one of the guys that I heard today, I'm able to listen. I've been doing some different things at work, so I can listen to things while I'm at work. And I kind of had my YouTube on, kind of scrolling through some of these different things, and all of them were talking about the same thing. This one guy who was I don't know who he was, but he was one of the originators of the Logos Bible program, which is a very popular Bible program. Does anybody use that Logos? Very popular. I think I had it or had the trial at one time. But it has tons of commentaries. And he said he was bragging that every one of the commentaries on the Logos commentaries presents this view. And he says, if you're not listening to these or you're listening to somebody else, you're making a huge mistake. And he quoted early commentators from Mesopotamia, this is where it actually originates, the gods having relationships with women and producing this hybrid. But some later commentators, Josephus seems to mention it. It's mentioned, I think, unless I'm getting my wires crossed. I think it's mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls, at least a little portion of it. It's mentioned by there was another guy in the 1st or 2nd century what's that guy's name? It's a very popular book now. Enoch, the book of Enoch. Okay, he mentions it, but it doesn't make any sense, Brother Easton.
The book of Enoch's a known thing.
Yeah.
All biblical scholars agree that it's false. It doesn't represent who Enoch was.
Well,
It's a known falsery.
well, I think it's a different Enoch than the one, obviously, than the one in Genesis.
It's alluding to that Enoch, but it's a known falsality.
Yeah.
So it's purely known as fiction.
Well, either way, men have ideas, and they love to promote their ideas. But what I've been stressing since the beginning is and I don't think any of you really ever had that thought, but nonetheless, empty our minds of preconceived ideas, understandings, things that we've heard that kind of take root. Because when you hear something different, it kind of upsets that. And I'm familiar with that. I've experienced that. But if you take things in order as they're presented from the Word of God, it all makes sense. So what we've seen up till this point in Genesis is that God created the heavens and the earth. Earth is the focal point of all of this. It's not the heavens, it's not the stars, it's not any other planets. It's this earth is the focal point. And what's the focal point on this earth? The focal point on this earth is man. Okay, it's Adam and his seed. And we're going to get into that a little bit on Sunday as we go into this. But it's all about mankind. The crowning glory of God's creation, created in his image, unique among all of his creation. And they are to rule and reign. One thing I didn't mention throughout all of this was what's referred to as the Adamic covenant. And that is the covenant that God made with man. And that is man will rule, or he's intended to rule and reign on this earth. Okay? Man failed. At the very beginning, Adam failed. And of course, we know the story. God stepped in, offered himself as a sacrifice, and he is going to be the redeemer, not only of fallen man, but everything. And to tie this in with Revelation, I'm starting to more and more believe that that idea that I presented, that I got from somebody else, it wasn't my original idea, that the scene in Revelation chapter 5 of the seals, the 7 seals, that is the deed to the land. So it's all about inheritance. And the word sons, okay, and the problem with all of these commentators is that they look at the word sons and they think it's referring to somebody that was born from somebody else. It's really not that. It really has nothing to do with a birth, okay? It's really an inheritance. And Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He is the heir of this earth. And all of those who have this relationship with him through the covenant promises, these are sons of God. That's the thought we're going to pursue starting on Sunday as we get into chapter 5. Now, what about these guys in chapter 4? Okay, there's 2 lines here. Cain kills his brother Abel. I think I got down through verse 10 on Sunday morning. And in my opinion, as I stated in the message, the problem behind Cain killing his brother was pride. The same thing that Satan experienced in his fall, Cain experienced in killing his brother. And it shows in that when he was questioned by God, his countenance fell. Okay, and then he became agitated, he became angry, and God questions him in verse 6. We'll pick up in verse 10. So I talked a lot about Cain, a little bit about Abel, but it says this. Cain's testimony is very clear. It speaks in what he did, but then also in verse 10 it says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. So we have the first martyr, basically, and his blood is what speaks his testimony. He died for his faith. We don't know the conversation that took place between Cain and Abel, but this is the first really religious act that was so disagreeable that Cain killed his brother. And there has been millions upon millions of people who have died over their religious views, both in truth and in lies. People die for lies. Look at the jihad, those that are willing to die for, was it 10,000 virgins or something like that? And of course, they come to find out that there was actually Virginians. That's a joke. I forget how it goes. That's all you're going to get. But anyway, they die for what they believe, and it's all for nothing. But moving on to verse 11, I want to notice something here. Okay. So Cain, rather than repenting, and God gave him every opportunity to repent and turn back, and he could have. He could have been restored. I believe that he stood in position here as Adam's son, as a son of God. And in righteousness, he could have led his children to be a follower of God, but he chose not to. Okay? So in verse 11, we kind of see this spiral downwards. God says in verse 11, and now you are cursed from the earth. What does that mean? Cursed from the earth. Could it have to do with the inheritance, perhaps? He no longer is in a position of being this heir, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield unto you its strength. A fugitive and a wanderer, a vagabond, shall you be in the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from your face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer, vagabond, in the earth, and it shall come to pass that anyone who finds me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, therefore, whosoever slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. So a couple of questions I have that are unanswered. We can only surmise. Why didn't God kill Cain? An eye for an eye. Well, the law is not in place yet. I believe God still is a God of grace. I believe he still loved Cain, given him opportunity to repent. And I think I stated this on Sunday. Even though Cain is still, he's walking away from what he's known, kind of going out, wandering the earth now, at least that's kind of how I see it. He's still religious. He didn't stop believing in God. I believe he's a saved person, as we say. He just allowed his flesh to take over. And that's a theme throughout the scriptures, that saved people can allow their flesh to take over and control their mind and their actions, and that's exactly what he did. It doesn't say anything about Satan being involved in this. This was all Cain. He's pictured in Genesis chapter 3 in tempting or seducing Eve with that apple. But he's not mentioned here. Angelic beings aren't mentioned anywhere in these passages. So keep that in mind. Cain now is leaving. He's still very religious, but he is very carnal. I say religious in contrast to spiritual. He's not spiritual. The spiritual one is gone. Okay, he was killed. So just another quick thought, just to maybe make sense out of this. I don't think that these are the only two representatives of humanity other than mom and dad on the earth at this time. I think there's a lot of people still. We don't have all of the information. So there has been procreation taking place. There have been marriages taking place. There have been lots of sacrifices being done. This isn't the only time this takes place. So let's see. In verse 16. So it says, Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife. Apparently he had a wife. Did they have other kids before this? I'm not sure. It doesn't say. This seems to indicate this is their first, although it wouldn't be out of the question to think that they had other kids. I think maybe this is the first after this incident. But anyway, Cain knew his wife in the same way that Adam knew his wife Eve, and bore Enoch. Now notice this. They do something that doesn't seem all that bad, right? But think about it. We don't see any instruction from God for them to build a city. We don't see anything about that. But it does say, and it points out, almost the fact that it says this, it almost stands out like it's a glaring problem, okay? He built the city, and this seems to be standing out also as a glaring problem, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. A lot of places were named after men and women, I believe. But they were named after people, okay? Nothing necessarily wrong with that. But the point here, I think, is that they're doing this without the leadership of God, without the leadership of the Holy Spirit. God's stamp of approval is not on this. Maybe it's innocent. Maybe they're just, building a city. We don't know what they were using to build with. Were they just wood huts or mud huts or caves, or, how did they survive? We're going to see some things that lead up to the flood, that this society, this generation of people seem to be very advanced, probably far more advanced than we would give them credit for. In fact, we're going to see some things here that I've always known it was there, but it's kind of shocking, the things that they did on their own. And this is all being done without the approval of the Lord. So in verse 18 it says, unto Enoch now, Cain's grandson, was born Irad or Irad. Irad begot Mehujael. Mehujael begot Methushael. Methushael begot Lamech. Another way we know that they still kind of retain God in their knowledge is that these names have the name God in them. And that's very common in the Old Testament. Anytime you see the term El at the end of a name or at the beginning, that is God. Okay? It's a reference to God, or an acknowledgement to God. And that, of course, was very common with the godly line as well. Now, this begins to be a society, a family that is now absent of God. And it's going to lead into the problem leading up to the flood. How did things that were so good go so bad so fast? Well, one thing it shows us is how quickly sin can spread and how fast it can do a lot of damage. Almost like a forest fire. A little spark can start small, but if it doesn't get under control and extinguished right away, it can do a lot of damage very fast. Thousands and thousands of acres, thousands upon thousands of dollars, lives lost because it did not get controlled. And sin will do the same thing. If we don't control it in our lives, it can do the same thing. We don't see any mention of women's names here. It's all men. I think there might be a woman named at some point, actually. Let me retract that. There was another point I was going to make with this. Moving on to verse 18. So Lamech took unto him 2 wives. Why does it point that out? Did they have the understanding that really marriage was to be between one man and one woman? That we might think of that as being a new concept in the New Testament, but really it seems to have always been the case. And let me mention this also. The marriage between Adam and Eve really was about the covenant. Kind of underlying that covenant was the fact that they were to fill the earth with children. So there had to be some uncomfortable things taking place in the beginning to get the earth populated. But once things started going, I think the concept, the understanding was that one woman, one man. Now here it points out that Lamech took for himself 2 wives. So it does name them right here. See? So the name of one was Adah, the name of the other Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of such that dwell in tents, and such as have cattle. So these things are pointed out for a reason. We're kind of getting an idea of what their society looked like. In contrast to building a city and kind of settling in a city, what we see with especially Abraham and others of the Semitic line, I think especially, we'll get to that at some point, is that they were more or less nomads. They never really settled in one place. They would really travel as God led them. Especially in the case of Abraham, he was told to get out of Ur and then follow God. But this was very customary to them. They were nomads. They often traveled. And there are some cultures of people still in the Middle East and probably other places who are the same way. They're nomads. Who are the people? I think this is probably derogatory, but I think they're known as gypsies. Yeah, they really don't have any home to settle in. But they're also known as thieves and robbers, and for some reason that song by Cher is coming into my mind. I think I just quoted a part from that song. But it's still kind of customary in some ways. But the reality is, we should also be nomads on this earth. There's nothing permanent about this earth that we have. It's nice to settle and get, kind of plant your roots, but it's tempting to plant our roots so deep that this earth, this world, takes a hold of us, and we forget about the city to come. Abraham really didn't plant roots anywhere. He really searched for that city to come. Hebrews chapter 11, I think verse 10. I think I spent, I don't know how many weeks on that verse. But he kept his sights on that city that was to come. And that's really what we should do. Now, and I think what we're seeing here with this line of people now, and I don't see any reason to think that all these people now, all of a sudden, the descendants of Cain, that they're all lost. They did believe in God. I believe that they believed in God, okay, as Cain showed them God. But they had a religious understanding, a misguided view of who God is. But they still knew who God was, and I think they still had a general understanding of what God expected. And that would describe a lot of religions today, where they know God. I believe many are saved, but they have a misguided understanding of what God's purpose is for mankind. And they're going about their service all wrong. So this is that fallen line here, that largely because of Cain. He's the responsible one as the high priest of this family. And I wonder if he actually kept that position even in this state of moving away from God, offering sacrifices still. I don't have any reason to think that he wouldn't continue to offer sacrifices. It doesn't mean that God accepted them. But I think that sometimes when you get away from God, you get delusional, thinking that what you're doing is pleasing to God when it's not. I'm just surmising here. But it's clear that it's painting a picture of a family that is using their own resources to begin to do things. Now, notice, was somebody's hand going up? Okay. So Ada bore Jabal, he became such the father of those that dwell in tents and those that have cattle. His brother's name was Jubal. Jubal and Jabal. He was the father of all the, listen to this, handle the harp and pipe. So musical instruments. They already knew about music. I wouldn't be surprised if the other line of people had that understanding as well. Where do they get that understanding from? I don't know. But they knew how to make these things. And here's where it gets even more interesting. In verse 22, Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, who, according to one recent movie, was a stowaway on the ark. Anybody see that? With Maximus was Noah, Russell Crowe. But yeah, Tubal-Cain was a stowaway. I don't recall reading that in the Bible, but anyway, this is him. He was an instructor of every forger in bronze and iron before the flood. What else did they have before the flood? They had a lot of intellect. They were very smart. I believe that they were operating, I think, as full as you can in a fallen state mentally. Yeah.
Renee and I always talk about that because, like, electricity, this physics. I mean, it's always been here. Man has just harnessed lights, and, so who knows? Maybe they built the ark with power tools. Who knows? I mean, because they lived a long time. That's in their fresh minds, for a long time to think of things.
Yeah.
So who knows how it was before the flood? We're probably thinking like, oh, primitive.
Well.
But they lived such a long time, and things like lights. That's physics. That's always it.
It was 1,656 years from the time that Adam sinned until the flood. That's a long time. We've only had electricity since Benjamin Franklin, in the 1600s or something, late 1600s, early 1700s. What year did he invent electricity? I forget. Yeah, was it late 1700s, I guess. That's not a long time, when you think about it. So all of these years since the flood, man was just kind of floundering, trying to make his way. And it's only been recently when things really started to advance and progress rapidly and quickly. So I wonder the same thing. Maybe there was a point where things just really began to rapidly increase towards the time before they entered the ark. Noah entered the ark. Easton.
Well, scientifically, ancient bones were seen as being stronger, thicker, meaning they were able to lift more weights and do more things than modern men or modern humans.
Right.
So, they can only go back so far, seeing that and barely understanding that. There wouldn't be any reason not to think that the men right after the fall were much more physically superior and stronger in every way, especially living hundreds and hundreds of years at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they age at year 100. They look like old men for the next 900 years.
Right.
You know what I mean? They probably age quite slowly and quite. It's a long time for muscles to develop and build, and certain things. The limitations we kind of put on them are limited to what we understand, our very small time of understanding.
Yep.
But there's no reason to think that their brains were probably quite a bit sharper. Their bodies were quite a bit stronger.
I think most of that age was destroyed in the flood for a reason. I think God did it for a reason, to really start fresh and new. Brother Mario.
She was trying to say this. I made a comment. I was like, instead of Milwaukee, they had Milwaukee. Until then.
Like the Flintstones? So, before I lose all of you, one more thing that Easton pointed out that I wanted to bring into all this. What's missing from this chapter that we see very clearly in chapter 5? Now, you haven't looked at chapter 5 probably, but you know it. It tells us the ages that they had their first son and when they died. Nothing about that here. I don't know exactly why, but it's a glaring difference between this genealogy and that other genealogy. And the other genealogy that we're going to see in chapter 5 is a genealogy that is protected by God because of what he promised in Genesis chapter 3, when he told the woman that your seed, I need to turn and read that. Where is it? Well, I think you know what I'm talking about.
13, or 15.
Oh, it's way back there. Yeah, 15. I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed. Okay, here's where seed comes up again. Thy seed and her seed. He shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So there's a promise of the Messiah, which is why I think that I mentioned that. I think when Eve had her firstborn son, that her thought was, this is the man that God was talking about. But of course it wasn't. It's got to be protected and come at the right time. So let me go through these last couple of verses here, and then if you have any comments. So there's no ages of these men that are mentioned. In verse 23, Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. He talked to a third person. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man for wounding me, and a young man for hurting me. Is he saying that he committed double murder? 2 murders? It seemed like a confession, but we don't really know exactly what happened, what went on. But nonetheless, he makes this comment. This is still him speaking. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. And that's where it ends. This line, this is where the Bible stops speaking about this generation. Just my thoughts on this, it doesn't seem, we have a sort of a mini record of what took place among Cain and his descendants, just to give us an idea of what's happening. And when since we're now at the end of the age, we put all of the Bible together, to me it's clear what the problem is. This line of people chose to walk a path that was different than the path designed by God, and they justified it. Okay? It doesn't mean that it was accepted by God. It means that they justified it in their minds. I believe that there were a lot of self-righteousness involved in this society. They were very religious, but they were not spiritual. I think that's the key. And something very interesting is also said to close this chapter out, before we actually get into chapter 5, which we won't do tonight. So, verse 24 says, I read that, verse 25 says, Adam knew his wife again. Now, again, there's lots of people on the earth. These are the chosen ones by God that he is going to protect the line of the Messiah through. I know I mentioned this before, but years back there was a very popular poem or article called the Scarlet Thread of Redemption. It's kind of based off of the thread that what's her name let down to show the Israelites. Huh?
Rahab?
Yes, Rahab. Thank you. Rahab let down the scarlet thread. It's a beautiful picture, but the scarlet thread of redemption is traced from Genesis all the way through the coming of Christ and him dying on the cross, and then all the way through to him coming back again. So God has chosen a line in fallen man that he is going to protect. He makes it very clear in several places that there will always be a remnant of people that he is going to protect. Now, that does not mean that he makes people do these things. Do any of you feel like you were made to come here tonight? Like when you serve God, that you have no control over what you're doing, that God makes you do it? No, you do it because you want to, because you love God. We trust in God to help us. We cannot do it without his help. But there will always be a remnant of people. To tie this into what we've been talking about in Thessalonians, with the persecutions, the tribulations that they were facing, the tribulations that are going to come at the end, it's going to try us. It's going to test us. And there will be people who pass through that trial, and they will continue to praise God even in the face of all of that. But there will be many who do not. So verse 25 again says, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, called his name Seth. For God, said she, has appointed me another child instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. I did not look this up, but for some reason I'm thinking that the name Seth has to do with one being appointed by God. So he now stands as the representative of Adam, the son of God. Verse 26, to Seth, to him also there was born a son. He called his name Enosh. This also is a very telling statement to close out chapter 4 before we get into the genealogy of the sons of God. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Before I give you my take on that, what does that mean to you? How do you interpret that? So, everything we just read about this fallen line, Cain and his descendants, the path that they're taking, then it mentions God raising up another Seth to take Cain's place. Then it makes this very obvious point that stands out at the end of this. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. What do you think that's saying? Anybody want to?
Well, it sounds like from Seth's line. From Seth, from not Cain's line, but from Seth's line, they stayed with God.
Yeah. Well, what were you going to say?
That they knew the Lord, but something is compelling them to do this. Like maybe some things that are going.
Well, I think you're seeing it differently than I'm seeing it. So let me give you my take, my spin. I think what it's saying is that now with the coming of Seth, his bearing a son Enosh, now, unlike before, men are beginning to call upon the name of the Lord. And by the way, this isn't just, we look at this as like a short period of time, like maybe a couple of years. This is probably hundreds of years, perhaps. I have no idea how long this is taking place. But whatever the timing is, that generation was not calling upon the Lord or seeking his guidance or seeking his counsel. I think that's why it mentions the cities that are being built, even the musical instruments. Yes, God's people can and should use musical instruments, use their talents for the Lord. But I think what we see here is, what are musical instruments most often used for in today's world? To promote self. It's about pride. In fact, I'll take this back to Sunday in pride. The city being named after his son. Welcome to the city of, I forget his son's name, whatever it was. In bold letters, his son. Okay, it's a little bit of pride there. I mean, wouldn't you love to have a city named after you? Steveville, that's named after me. There's actually a Susanville up in Northern California. So people do that. Huh? Ortonville. Yeah, that's a song. Must be a place too. But there's a little bit of pride in some of these things. Anytime, we want to see our face, we want to see our name, we want to see our work promoted. The city, the fact that they were using the harp and the pipes, bronze and iron, but they were doing it without the Lord. They weren't calling upon the Lord while they're doing this. But now, these men are begin to call upon the Lord. Then it rolls right into chapter 5. Yes?
So on 25, the way I always thought about it, because right here from 16 to 24, that's Cain's line.
Mm-hmm.
And it says Adam knew his wife again, called name Seth. So in my mind, that's right after Cain kills Abel. So it's not. So the way I'm thinking is like not all of Cain's descendants and then Seth. It's more like right after Cain killed Abel, then he had Seth. So like Seth and Cain were.
Could be. I mean, either way, in my mind, either way, what you just said, still, what I said, kind of makes sense.
Yeah. I'm just saying like the timing. I think.
Yeah.
I don't think there was. Like,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I don't think this actually takes place at the end of all this genealogy. So, yeah, I agree with that. Was there a hand up over here?
Oh, I was just saying, that's what I was saying, like, they didn't put, all this time they didn't put their God in their planning and building.
Yeah.
And that's why they're calling upon them, these men are now calling on the name of the Lord.
And it would make sense, because right before the flood, it tells us what they were doing. They were eating and drinking and marrying, giving in marriage. None of those things are sinful. The problem was they were doing it without the Lord. That was the problem. Easton.
So interesting is Enoch is another word for man.
Hmm.
So his name is another word for man. When it says then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. It's kind of a symbolic. This is man's line of those who call upon the name of the Lord. Adam is man.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting sort of reset.
Yeah. And the name Adam, you kind of think of it as his name, and Bible seems to use it that way, but he also represents our species, who we are, those that are created in God's image, all of mankind. That includes both godly and ungodly. We're all man. And I'll say this, and I've said this many times, is that with this line, with this species of man created in God's image, now fallen in sin, it is the only being created that has the possibility of redemption. No other creation has that possibility. Not the angels and everything I else said. Now, God's going to restore the animals, the earth, plants. It's all going to be restored. But they don't have a consciousness like man does. So, Sunday we are going to be getting into chapter 5. So if you want to read ahead, go ahead and look at that genealogy. Brother Bruce, yes.